Shalom. Welcome to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein, and we will be joined on the phone shortly by Pastor Michael Stevens, who is the African Outreach Director for Christians United for Israel. It's kind of an interesting conversation to have as we're heading into Martin Luther King weekend, and also to get a perspective about the evangelical community's attitude toward Israel. This week has been a very difficult week, particularly for me, as somebody who does a lot of work with the Sudanese and South Sudanese communities and who also does Israel advocacy. This has been a very troubling week. First, South Sudan is in utter chaos, and there are negotiations ongoing right now to try to bring some order and stability back, to try to end the possibility of a civil war breaking out over what is essentially a political dispute between President Salva Kiir and his former vice president, Riek Machar, and their allies over control of the SPLM, over the Sudan People's Liberation Movement. And the talks evidently are moving forward somewhat. We don't have a whole lot of details because obviously those are confidential. But we're not seeing kind of leaping forward, okay, big concessions going on here yet. And the organization that myself and Mark Finkelstein, who's also with us in studio today, or with me in studio today, work on in Des Moines, along with a number of our Sudanese and South Sudanese members of our community, the United Sudanese and South Sudanese Communities Association has authored, I should say, a letter to Salva Kiir and Riek Machar that has been signed on to by a number of leaders in the South Sudanese community, from other communities, from Sudan, and also from a number of organizational leaders that do anti-genocide work, trying to encourage them to do a single thing: stop. The situation in South Sudan is such that it is simply too volatile to continue to push forward with the kind of dispute they're doing, and if they move forward militarily like they have been, they run the risk of tearing the country apart and causing the international support that has been there to go away, and any number of other things, including causing a lot of suffering and many casualties. And so we simply said one word: stop. You can find that article on the USASCA website, which is USASCA, USASSCA.org, or SudanSouthSudan.com, which is also another way to get to that website. I also recently published an article today. I published an article today about the recent situation of the asylum seekers from Africa in Israel. And the situation is a very difficult one. There are 50,000 plus Sudanese and South Sudanese asylum seekers who are in Israel right now. They're trying to, mainly from Eritrea and Sudan, who are trying to be recognized as refugees in need of asylum by the Israeli government. The Israeli government has not wanted to grant all of them asylum, and in the process of not granting all of them asylum, has not granted any of them asylum. I wrote an article for We Are For Israel today, that's all spelled out, .org, suggesting a way forward. This is not an easy situation, but it's important to talk about. Another issue that has come up this week is that Moshe Ya'alon, known as Boogie, who is Israeli defense minister, spoke to a group of press people off the record, at least that's what it says. He spoke off the record about what was going on in the peace process. The reporter who happened to be there from Yediot Aharonot, which is a Israeli left-leaning daily newspaper, decided that he really didn't like what Ya'alon had to say, and he was going to shame him and call him out by exposing what he said. And Ya'alon was frustrated. It's very clear that he was frustrated. He was upset with what he understood to be the position being put forward by the United States, and he's frustrated by the attitude of Secretary Kerry that he could simply kind of accomplish these things without concessions from the Palestinians, and that the Israelis would be willing to accept security compromises that they have said explicitly that they would not be willing to accept. So I can understand the frustration. The problem is that he uttered what ended up being fairly insulting statements about Secretary Kerry. Needless to say, the United States leadership was upset. I certainly would be upset if somebody made those statements about me. And Secretary and Defense Minister Ya'alon has apologized. But the reality is that we're going to start seeing more and more of this dirty laundry being aired as the peace process it becomes more and more difficult to advance. It's very clear that President Abbas, the Palestinian side, is not willing to negotiate, not willing to compromise on some of the major issues that the Israelis would need him to compromise on. It's very clear that the Israelis are not able to accept a number of the things that the Palestinians are demanding and are not willing to compromise on those either. And there's a question of whether or not the peace process is actually moving forward. Needless to say, there's a lot of frustration built into that, and I think we're going to start seeing criticism coming from both sides about not only each other, but also about the United States negotiating position as it attempts to bridge those gaps. I don't think this is the last we're going to hear of criticism of Secretary of State Kerry from either side. In addition, we have the Iran deal moving forward this week, and there's some questions about concessions made to Iran. The Iranians seem to be very happy with the deal that's on the table. I think the Israelis are very unhappy with the deal that's on the table. And when you put that issue, the Iranian issue, in conjunction with what they see as a peace process that's ending up demonizing Israel, you end up with a situation in which the Israeli frustrations at the United States diplomatic team are particularly acute this week. And I think that explains all of what we've seen this week coming from the Israeli leadership. That has been the world in 5 minutes, actually 7.5 minutes, and this is Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. We'll be right back.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner and general manager of Service Legends. I brought along a couple of the home comfort heroes.
Hi, I'm Tammy Wells.
I am Nick Wondershad.
I'm administrative manager
I am the senior technician
from Service Legends.
It seems like every good thing, when you feel it to the bone that it's good, there's a lot of hard work put behind it. I don't think that you can fake it and have it turn out good.
You know, if we seem like, okay, that's just weird, it's just a furnace, why would you believe so deeply in a furnace? It's not just that, you know, we want to show the world that you can have good service.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be, it's your home.
You know, it's built into our daily trainings, it's built into our culture, that we're gonna do whatever it takes to have each client say they love us, period.
That's why we spend all the hours in the training that we do. And if we guarantee it's gonna be a good experience for you, or else it's free, what type of work do you think we're gonna do?
There is a guarantee.
Temperature selection guarantee, fixed right or it's free guarantee, comfort guarantee, best value guarantee. All of these guarantees hold us accountable to ensuring that we exceed your expectations. And if for whatever reason we'd fail and we can't make it right, we guarantee all of those guarantees with a 100% money back guarantee.
I mean, if you don't think that your technician can fix it right, are you gonna say that to a client? No.
You don't have to worry about having a technician come to your house.
We drug test, background check all of our team members. We put safe people in your home. Each and every one of our service techs, 400 hours a year in training.
You tell it the minute they walk in the door. They know what they're doing, they've done their homework, and they actually truly care about what you want.
Because at the end of the day, you're the person that makes sure I have a job.
They're gonna be listening. They're gonna wanna know what your challenges are. Then they're gonna come and give you options, and you get to choose.
If I'm there to help and I make it easy and painless, I did my job right that day.
Well, when it comes to your comfort, safety, and your family, you know, you don't necessarily go buy the most expensive, but you get the most bang for your buck.
Oh, it's worth it, because there's a lot of people that will find a way to get it to work right now and then leave, and then come back, charge you again, and the cycle just repeats itself. So when I'm out there looking at the furnace, I want to find why it failed today. How can we change the part today with something that you're not going to have to worry about? Is it worth changing the part today? I mean, you can put a lot of money into a furnace. I can fix parts all day. There's good job security in that for me, but is it the right thing for you?
I get a lot of the phone calls of after the technicians are there. They're just in awe. They're like, wow, you guys are great. I mean, I don't even know what to say. You guys are great. Everything you did was perfect. It was great.
Keep going though, I like this.
Just give us a try. I'm gonna take all the risk.
I've got the time to make this right. I've got the support to make it right.
Just check us out.
And if you don't see the value in what we do,
I mean, fixed right or it's free or 100% money back.
enough said.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines, and we're joined on the phone by Pastor Michael Stevens, who is the Outreach Director, African Outreach Director, African American Outreach Director, I should say, for Christians United for Israel. And is a pastor of a church in North Carolina. Pastor Stevens is welcome. We're excited to have you on Understanding the World with us.
Rabbi David and Mark, great to be on the call. Happy New Year to you both, and thanks for having me today.
Thank you. It's nice to hear from you.
You're welcome. So, tell us a little bit about what you're up to these days.
Oh wow, what am I not up to, man? It is a very, very spectacular season to pastor in a local church, but also partner with the Jewish community and doing pro-Israel solidarity events all over the country, all 50 states. As you know, as you've mentioned already, I serve as the African American Outreach Director for CUFI, Christians United for Israel, the largest pro-Israel organization in the world. I think we're now over 1.6 million members, and that is less than 8.5 years. So we've had some exponential growth, and I've been, particularly the last couple of days, I've been confirming probably enough appointments to last me between now and July. And I'm all over the country doing these events. It's an incredible response. People want to know how can we support Israel, particularly from a biblical, theological, and maybe a very practical Christian narrative. So on top of that, my oldest son, just got his 8th full scholarship offer to play football for a local school. So he had to make, unfortunately, a decommitment from Kansas State, and now he's committed to playing in-state. My middle son, my daughter, wife, everyone's doing well. Very busy season.
So where's your son going to school?
He'll be going to North Carolina State University.
Hey, he's not going to be part of the Wolf Pack. You're talking to a Tar Heel here.
Yeah, I know it. We had that conversation. That was in Iowa a few weeks ago. But yeah, this was his dream offer. Carolina also recruited him to play offense, but he wanted to play defense. So he's a blessed kid. In fact, the head coach will be in our home tomorrow for an in-home visit, and we're excited about that.
Okay, well, at least he's going to be in the ACC. We can root for that.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Pastor Michael, can you tell us a bit how you got into the mode of pro-Israel thinking?
Yeah. You know what? My wife and I, we went on a grad school trip about 12, 13 years ago to Israel. Didn't really think anything of that trip other than a pilgrimage, something that I think Christians probably should do in a lifetime. Didn't think anything of it. Back in 2007, catch you up about 8 years, I'm at home in Charlotte, North Carolina. I just really had a strong impression and revelation that our church should be doing more to support Israel. I was reading Genesis chapter 12, read the scripture that said God would bless me if I blessed Israel. He'd support me if I stood with Israel. And I took that to heart. I told my young church at that time that we should be doing more to support Israel and our Jewish friends. And unfortunately, at that time, I knew nothing about Israel, the Jewish community. But the more and more I read, the more I studied, the more I realized we have to do something here. And so from a biblical and theological perspective, we found ourselves supporting Israel. About a year later, I met Pastor John Hagee at our denominational meeting in Memphis, Tennessee. And the weird thing about that was, David and Mark, there were 20,000 African Americans and 2 Caucasians in that whole convocation or convention. And one just happened to be Pastor Hagee. He said, listen, we got a young organization, a new organization, and I'd like to get some help in North Carolina. Needless to say, I said, absolutely. What can we do to get involved? We got involved. We started supporting, and the rest is, as they say, history. Been doing it now for the last 7 years. It's been an absolutely phenomenal experience.
Michael, what was your first trip to Israel like?
Moving, riveting, and just aha moments. Again, back in 2000, 2001, to actually walk, to sit, to be at a place that, like a lot of the Christians, a place we've always read about, some have preached about, some have taught about, but to actually be there to put everything into context, it was just one aha moment, one emotional moment after the other for the 6, 7, 8 days I was there.
What is Kufi all about?
You know what, Kufi, and we like to say Kufi, by the way. We try not to say Kufi. It sort of sounds like goofy, and we don't want to be related to anything.
Okay. Okay,
No,
I'm admonished.
No,
that's fine.
Yeah, no problem. Now, Kufi, again, we are a one-issue organization, and that is simply to be pro-Israel, particularly from a biblical and a theological perspective. We don't get in a lot with the political, not a lot of the civic, but we are a Christian grassroots organization that seeks to teach other Christians on why we should support Israel and the Jewish state.
Yeah, it's a fairly simple point of view in that what I found in my advocacy, and I think you probably found this in yours too, is when you talk about support for Israel, people always want to say, why aren't you criticizing Israel about this or criticizing Israel about that? And how do you go about responding to people from your community who want to say, well, why is Israel doing this and why aren't we speaking out about it?
Well, I tell you what, Israel, just like the United States of America, is not a perfect country. It is not a perfect nation. They've got their issues as we have our issues. But again, from a Christian biblical perspective, it should not discount nor demean what we as Christians should be doing. That we have a mandate from the Bible to stand with Israel. Again, with whether she's perfect or imperfect. Number two, we've come to believe there's a lot of Western media biasness of what we hear in the West about Israel, particularly being an apartheid state, being an oppressive state. I've been to Israel 12, 13 times. I've found that not to be true. I did my doctorate degree at Oral Roberts University on the church supporting Israel, and from a very independent perspective, I found out that, wait a minute, it is not an apartheid state. It's not a state that oppresses its Palestinian neighbors. And a lot of that media bias is actually what it is biasness. And so you have to take it in the meat and spit out the bones, but it should not, again, take away from the fact that we should be supporting and standing with our Jewish friends there in Israel.
Now, Pastor, you're an author. Tell us about some of the works you've written.
My earlier works dealt primarily with the context and the culture of the African American church, whether it was fatherlessness, reaching men, dealing with even some of the more sensitive issues of our community, dealing with homosexuality, even finding a way to bring healing, ministry, support in a very loving, very supportive way. Other books deal with spiritual fathers, spiritual sons. My last book, however, was sort of off the beaten path because I was so passionately and purpose-driven in the fact that the African-American church, I believe, owes Israel and the Jewish community a favor. We have so many things in common, believe it or not, everywhere from us being dislocated from our ancient land, the disenfranchisement we've dealt with, some of the despairing attacks we both as a community have dealt with, racism, but yet in the 1960s, it was the Jewish community that stood shoulder to shoulder with the African-American community. In fact, we all see the pictures of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, standing shoulder to shoulder with Dr. Martin Luther King. That story doesn't often get told, particularly in 2014 and beyond. And if you're sort of my age, 44 and some change and under, we don't know the rich history and narrative between the two communities. So the last book I wrote last year dealt with some of the unique relationships between the African-American and Jewish community.
In addition to Rabbi Heschel, who comes from the conservative movement, among Dr. King's other friends were Rabbi Eisendrath. David, can you say a few words about?
Well, I mean, the Reform movement worked with Dr. King on a number of different things. And the Religious Action Center actually ended up developing a lot of relationships. Al Vorspan and his family did a lot of things with the African American community and the civil rights movement. And as we're dealing with, as we're coming up on Martin Luther King weekend here, can you tell us a little bit about the interaction between Jews and African Americans in the civil rights movement, and how does your congregation, as you deal with Israel advocacy as well, specifically deal with that kind of relationship over Martin Luther King weekend?
Sure. A lot of questions here. I'll try to unwrap them one by one. Our church 110% fully supports Israel, particularly in the context of the African American community. Unfortunately, I'm on the road so much, I've got to almost manage volunteers to do the work with our local Jewish Federation and the community partnering, because obviously the work that I do, I'm on the road 90% of the time. The good news is that there's a very, very bright future between the two communities. Unfortunately, it does have a checkered past, and that's simply because there has not been enough Jewish advocacy from the African American perspective. Speaking of the civil rights era, 2 out of 3 non-blacks that marched in the South were Jews. And when you look at some of the historical organizations in the black community, particularly some of the student-led civil rights movements, organizations like CORE and SNCC and the SLCL, these were organizations that were often funded and began with Jewish resources. It is now becoming widely known that the NAACP that started in 1909 started in the home of a Jewish man. And it wasn't until the mid-'70s that the NAACP, and last I checked, that's the National Association of Advancement of Colored People. Well, it didn't have its first African-American leader until the mid-'70s. And so Jews have often, our Jewish friends have often been involved in the plight and the success of African-Americans. Unfortunately, because we didn't have a voice piece and a mouthpiece in the African-American community, the ones we heard was from, unfortunately, those who were Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, Louis Farrakhan, Khalid Muhammad. And these were not the most pro-Israel positive voices we could have heard from. Unfortunately, they were negative. And because there was no pro-Israel voice in the black community, a lot of the younger black generation, all we knew was what we heard Farrakhan say, that Jews were slumlords and they were against blacks, and there was a lot of social envy. Well, why is the Jews have accelerated in all facets of life and blacks are still struggling the way we're struggling? Well, it's the Jews' fault. That's why. And so unfortunate and so unfair. So my job is, not only, again, from a biblical and a theological narrative, but we want to make sure that the story is told in the black community, that there's a lot of rich history as well as a rich future between the two communities.
Can we focus for a few minutes on Dr. Martin Luther King himself? What do you know about him? How did you learn about him?
Well, again, a lot of my studies came because of the what we would call an applied research project, about a 275-page research document that I had to author, obviously, and pen. And I would say that, maybe a fourth has something to do with Dr. King, learning that he was just tolerating his Jewish friends. He was actually a friend and an advocate and an ally. In fact, in 1968, before he passed, in Memphis, Tennessee, it was reported that he was headed to a Seder during Shabbat in Memphis with his Jewish friends. And so he was very outspoken on supporting Israel. He talked about the fact that we have to defend Israel. We have to defend freedom. We have to defend what our Jewish friends stood for. Unfortunately, I don't have all the quotes in front of me on today, and my apologies for that. I'm just leaving the hospital visiting a staff member who was rushed to the hospital, so I'm not on the landline. My apologies. But one of the quotes...
Michael, I'm more interested about Martin Luther King himself. Did he have an impact in your local community of some sort?
He did, and he still does today. In fact, I'll see probably 1,500 congregants on this weekend, and we open our services giving a 5-minute countdown and sort of a walk of memory lane of who Dr. King was and who he still is today. And I do believe that his voice still rings to this very day in our personal lives, but also in a church corporate life. He represented democracy, freedom, courage, standing up. One of the quotes, I'm going to have to misquote him here, but he said, and as I paraphrase, that, yeah, we've got to deal with all of the bad people and all of the bad things people have done, but we also have to deal with the things that the silence of what good people did not do. And so to not stand, to not have courage, to not speak out on these issues to Dr. King was just as much as a detriment as the things that bad people have done.
Tell us about some of his acts of courage.
The letters he wrote from jail, the fact that he was willing to lay down not only his professional career, but his ministry career. The fact that he didn't want to be a typical reverend who basically was a proverbial ostrich with his head in the sand. But he was willing, obviously, to pay the ultimate price, which he did, in the name of freedom. Individual acts, the courage that it took to give that speech there in Washington, D.C. That was huge. And he knew those death threats were already obviously out there. He knew what he was facing in Memphis, Tennessee the weekend before he went. But because of democracy, and that was not just freedom for African Americans, but again, freedom for Jews, freedom for people who were oppressed all over the world. That's what he did individually, and those are the acts that today we're talking about, 50 years later.
What were some of the components of his theology?
You know, Dr. King, and again, I don't have my books in front of me, and my apologies for that, but I think that there was a marginalizing that he was just, the liberal theology, which you and I know, he didn't embrace liberal theology as we know it today. I do believe he had groundedness, and there was a rootedness in Bible, but it was also Bible that was social. And that seems to be the voice of our millennial crowd today. Hey, show us your faith, but show us some works here. And that's what Dr. King, in my opinion, epitomized. He said, here's my scripture, here's my faith, but I'm going to show you about marching. Rabbi Heschel said it best. He said, I marched with my feet. I felt as if my feet were praying when I marched. And that's what Dr. King was. That's what he did.
So, Pastor Stevens, when you go to different communities and you talk about Israel, what do you do? What do you get them to do? How are you received when you go to those churches that haven't been involved?
It is an overwhelming, and I emphasize the word overwhelming, 95%. It's a shock and awe moment, but it's also a moment that acknowledges the ignorance in our church. At the end of the day, the overwhelming response is, I did not know these things. Biblically, theologically, when I say theologically, we center around the whole replacement theology. That's the center point of my theological argument. And even from a social perspective, a lot of people in the church just didn't know that they had a biblical, theological, and social mandate to stand with Israel. And so there's very little resistance, and people find that hard to believe at times. Now, every once in a while, I'll have one or two that says, wait a minute, what have the Jews done for us? Or, well, what about the Palestinians? Or what about the land? And I'm not really here to have that conversation about the Palestinians and the oppression. I can deal with that, but that's not really my priority. But the overwhelming response is, we just didn't know. Thank you for enlightening us. Now that I know, what can I do? And we talk to them about going to Washington, D.C., speaking to your local congressional leaders, being in your pulpit, your Sunday school classroom, talking about the rich history and the need of supporting Israel.
So what does marching with your feet mean for you regarding Israel?
What it means is actions speak louder than words. And you can holler from the pulpit. You can, teach and sing and do all of the wonderful, comfortable, churchy things we're known to do. But really, where the rubber's laid down and where the rubber meets the road is true advocacy, whether that's in Washington, D.C., whether it's in your local community. What that means is, I believe, and John Maxwell said it best, and I've quoted this from time to time. He basically said that either you're at the table or you're on the menu. And so many times I found the African-American church were on the menu because we're not at the table. We're not at the table of diplomacy. We're not at the table of social change, and particularly as it relates to the Jewish community. I think we've done a wonderful job for the last 440 years in the black community, But you know what? We're not the only ones suffering. We're not the only ones being oppressed. We're not the only ones. And I understand that's a hard argument for many blacks to say and to receive. But why are we doing this for the Jewish community when we're not doing it for our own community? Well, we are doing it for our own community. But as much as we can, let's share that wealth of influence and make it happen in other communities that need that same help.
Pastor, tell me something about the inherent strength of the black community.
We are as strong as our solidarity. And since the days of slavery, 440 years ago, the black community traditionally has been a strong community, especially when fathers were in place. And the church, I might add, preacher, was the bedrock of that community. And going back to the Hebraic scripture, a nation that forgets God or a nation will be turned into hell. A nation that forgets us, God. And I'm not saying that in the condemning, fiery sermon perspective, but God has always been the center point of our community, and that's something that both, I believe, Israel and blacks share in common. Both, as culture, can go back to our spirituality as our strength. And as long as African Americans keep that as its core center, I think we'll strive, and there's hope. But the minute we kind of etch God out, we're in trouble. And I think we both would agree to the same.
Pastor, what do you see as the major civil rights challenges today? I know North Carolina specifically is one of the states that's had a history of voting issues. What all do you see as major civil rights challenges today?
Well, I know we've had the voting issues here in North Carolina, and unfortunately, I won't be able to speak too much with authority to those areas. And I know it sounds really strange to say this, but I'm almost the last one to find out what's happening in my own state because I'm just on the road that much. And I'm admitting that, yes, on international radio. But, I catch the news. I catch the headlines probably as much as the next man does. I do know that there's civil rights challenges. I know there's some voting issues in our own state now that they're asking people to bring IDs, and some people see that as another deterrent to get African Americans out. Here's what I do know. There's a statement that I like quoting from time to time that captures this moment, and that's this. The old had a will but did not have a way. Unfortunately, this new generation, we have a way, but we really don't have a will. And to me, that sort of speaks to the civil rights issues of our community. You got all of these kids dropping out of school, particularly in the African-American community. And I just want to jack them up and slap them and say, wait a minute. Now, we had kids who would stick their dogs in water holes for the right to go to school. Here you have a free right to go to school, but you have no willpower to stay in school. So, seeming our biggest challenges, to me, are internal, not necessarily external.
Pastor Michael, give us some idea of how the Black American church divides into different types of denominations.
You know what, just like any other church, we have our schisms, our divisions, and our personality-driven compartments. And unfortunately, we are as shallow and thin in that area of our church, unfortunately. I don't know if that is a socio-economical influence. I don't know if it's a diplomacy influence, but we're scattered. We're divided.
I'm not looking at it as a negative. I'm just looking at it as the diversity within the community itself. What are some of the denominations that you speak with?
Well, I do reference it as a negative because I do wish that we would not start a new church movement denomination every 15 minutes, seemingly right now in America. Sometimes I just think that's an issue of pride and arrogance, and can we not all get along? But that is the negative part of it. The positive is it's America. It's a free market. It's free commerce. People see that now on Sundays. We are not loyal to our denominational, what I call grandfather's Oldsmobile church, as our parents and our parents' parents were. Is there a bright spot in that? Maybe so. Maybe you don't want McDonald's, you want Wendy's. Maybe you don't want Wendy's, you want Burger King. So there is a variety out there. My goal is get in a church, get committed somewhere, get back to your community somehow, somewhere. So, from that point, Mark, that's a good thing. But there is, unfortunately, the negative because it makes us look like we don't know what we're doing. And how can I join from the outside looking in when you guys inside aren't on the same page when it comes to certain issues?
Can you tell us a little bit about what happens on college campuses from your perspective and interacting with college students on behalf of Christians United for Israel as well?
Sure. Good and bad. The bad is that there is a BDS movement, which you all are very familiar with. There is a huge anti-Israel movement on a lot of our major college campuses. That's the bad. The good news, help is on the way. Help is here. We just finished a SALT conference, a student advocacy leadership conference, in fact, last week. And I wasn't there, but the reports that I'm getting, it has been the best conference to date. And now we have over 130 chapters, what we call KUFI on campus. A lot of these chapters are standing shoulder to shoulder with the local Hillel. These chapters are basically letting our Jewish friends know you're not alone on this campus. You don't have to feel like you're by yourself. We're standing, we're speaking. And right now it's probably the fastest growing segment of Christians United for Israel, and that's simply because these college students are taking it to the next level.
What's the best way to learn about KUFI?
One word. Well, two words, KUFI.org, CUFI.org. It is a very robust, comprehensive website, everywhere from college students to Daughters to Zion, KUFI Espanol, KUFI in the African-American community, your local state leadership, city leadership. KUFI.org is the best way. Then on top of that, there are 6 full-time coordinators that do what I do. I happen to cover all 50 states because I'm the only African-American coordinator that covers all 50 states. However, each region has a coordinator. You're in Iowa. Your region, I think, would be Randy Neal from the West Coast. Forgive me for my geography ignorance here, but he covers everything from the mountains west. So you're Iowa, so you all would probably be in the central states. We've got a brand-new coordinator, Lyndon Allen, who's out of Tennessee. He's probably your regional coordinator. They'll come to your church, they'll come to your community center, and they'll have a all-expense paid, everything's already covered by CUFI opportunity to do a pro-Israel event in your community.
Tell us about the national conference then.
Yeah, that is our highlight. The national conference every year is typically the third week in July, beginning the third weekend in July on a Sunday evening. We'll go all day Monday, all day Tuesday. 5,000 Christians will come in from all over the country. We bring in some of the sharpest Christian and Jewish leaders, thinkers. The Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, he has been there on a couple of different occasions. We've had some of the top brass in both governments come and talk about Israel advocacy. Again, KUFI.org has information on how you can register, take advantage of early bird discounts. But it's really an opportunity to have a solidarity event, seminars, workshops, how to get more involved, how to learn of some of the leading cutting-edge resources, as well as what's happening in the Middle East and what's happening in the world today and how to be informed.
Now, one relatively controversial aspect is that a number of members of the Jewish community are still skeptical about KUFI.
Sure.
What would you say to them?
Yeah, no need to be skeptical. Pastor John Hagee, the vision of KUFI, David Brog, who is our executive director, who is Jewish, by the way, we've made it very clear. We understand 2,000 years of replacement theology. We understand 2,000 years of anti-Semitism, even in the Christian church. We're not that group. We're not that type. All of our events are non-conversionary. There are no altar calls. There are no indoctrinating meetings. In fact, we come from a very strong, what we would call in the Christian church, Old Testament, we come from a very strong 3 or 4 point why we stand and support Israel, why we pray for Israel. There are no tricks up the sleeve. There will be no, what's the catch? We've made that very clear. In fact, we get criticized probably more so in the Christian community because we're not having these Jewish prayer, messianic rallies. That's just not our MO. That's not who we are.
Let's talk a little bit about Iran. We haven't mentioned Iran. What's going on in the Christian churches or for Christians United for Israel, from their point of view, dealing with the Iran negotiations and the Iran nuclear situation?
We're trying to stay abreast. We're trying to stay abreast on some of the latest news that comes obviously out of Iran, out of some of the talks about sanctions. And, obviously as of recently, within 30 days ago, I think Kufa's perspective, which should be the Christian's perspective, is that we don't feel Israel is getting the best deal. We don't feel that we're being represented the best when it comes to sanctions. We don't believe that a partial deal is a good deal. We want to basically say it's not enough to slow down the advancement of nuclear weaponry. It's not enough to slow it down. We want to see it come to a complete halt altogether. And we understand that there's a realism and a non-realism to these conversations. But make no mistake about it, we want to say to Iran and the world that we look at the new regime as not being necessarily a better regime. I understand the jury's out, and I understand that, President Obama and John Kerry and the like, they want to wait and see, but we know time is of the essence. And so our goal is to see not just slow down the nuclear advancement, but to bring it to a complete stop, to reverse it, if anything, to keep sanctions going, because sanctions do work, and they have worked. And this is not time to take the gas off the pedal.
And one of the things that I'm wondering, and I've had different conversations with different Christian leaders about this. When you go on trips to Israel and you interact with the Christian community in Israel and in the Palestinian territories, what do you do from a Christian perspective? Who do you interact with whose opinions you share with the people you bring with you?
Yeah, well, first of all, we obviously, as of lately, and I say the last several years, we don't go into the Palestinian areas, Jericho and Bethlehem, obviously, we don't go into. Now, we will go and have some military interaction up on the Golan Heights. We don't spend a lot of time, believe it or not, with a lot of Christian influences in Israel. We do have some Christian friends in Bethlehem that we have some conversations with, just to give that Palestinian Christian perspective and what they're dealing with, because obviously there's a lot of Christian persecution right now in the Middle East, and Israel has become a very, very known safe haven. We're proud to be able to highlight that. But to give these pastors and ministry leaders a very healthy, independent perspective, we will have conversation with a lot of our Israeli Jewish leaders there. I think I can go on record by saying we do have conversations with some very respected journalists that are not Christian nor Jewish, but they give a very independent and isolated perspective of some of the propaganda and some of the biasness that we often hear in the West, and that's a very healthy and intelligent perspective. I'm proud to say that we have that perspective. I speak of, in particular, Khaled Abdul Sumait, who I think you and I both know is a very respected Muslim journalist who has gone on record to say, hey, I'm not pro-Israel, I'm not pro-Muslim, but the facts are the facts. To me, that is a very healthy perspective, and it's helping the Jewish advocacy amongst Christians.
How large is the conservative Christian community in America?
Well, we used to use the word evangelical, then we found out that there are 50 million evangelical community believers. We've kind of moved away from the evangelical because we didn't want to obviously exclude others who don't identify themselves as being evangelical. So we just say Bible-believing Christians. We think that we capture the conservative aspect of that group. But right now, we're looking at about 50 million. And for Kufa to reach 1.6 million, we've got 48 million plus to go. So big community that certainly has a lot of work to do.
And now, Pastor, I know this is a really difficult question for you to answer, and you can take some time to think about it. But I know we all wondered, what is your favorite place to go in Israel?
Thank you for the very question. I was bracing myself. I said, okay. And you know what? That is a difficult question. I was asked that question. I was in Israel last month, and believe it or not, I was probably the first time someone has ever asked me that question on that tour. And that's hard. I love being in the old city. I love the culture. I love the vibe, the pulse of the old city. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about being up in the northern Galilee area. To be at Capernaum, as you would pronounce it different in Hebrew, obviously, but to be in that Galilee, Capernaum area is moving to know that somewhere in this area, Jesus walked, he taught, he preached, and it's almost like reading the Bible in black and white, and now I'm able to see it in full 1080 HD. So it's really hard to say. Just flying in is very very emotional and moving. So there's not a one favorite; they're all favorite to me.
Yeah, and I can say one of my favorite things to do in Israel is to walk through the old city, but I can connect with what you're talking about, being where history was. And I did archaeology, and I dug at Sipori for 2 summers, and we kept having tour groups coming through and saying, people think that Jesus may have been here when it was the capital of the Galilee during Roman times, and walked these very streets that we're sitting here cleaning off, and numerous rabbis, famous rabbis who'd been through those areas too, and you don't even know if they lived in the house that you were cleaning off. You're finding stuff. It's a different perspective for people here who think that old is something that's 1900, and ancient is 1776. We're dealing with stones that really can speak. And they certainly can give sermons, in fact, and
absolutely
the connection. I know that American Jews have when they go to Israel. It fundamentally changes them, and the American Jewish community now has Birthright Israel and a number of other programs to just get American Jews to go to Israel, and the impact that has on them just being there and setting foot on the ground is really profound. I know as a pastor you have had that experience because you mentioned that to us, but what do you see when you bring other people with you, and do you bring young people with you, or is it primarily adults and pastors who you're bringing?
Well, you know what? And as you were talking, I thought about the first trip I took to Israel, and yeah, that was a very, very moving experience to realize, in America, the best we're going to ever have is, something that was, like you said, in the late 1800s or early 1700s. The oldest buildings you'll see is some of the northern cities, and you get blown away when you're in Philadelphia, New York, to see a building that might be back from the early 1800s. But gosh, when you go to Israel, you're talking stuff. You're looking at walls that were here 2,000, some 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago that are there. So yeah, that is a moment within itself. I primarily take adults to Israel. I've taken almost 100 pastors within the last 18 months to Israel. I take a group of 58 adults and maybe one child in the month of March coming up. And so primarily adults. But again, the question I often get is, don't you get tired? The 12-hour flight, and just, we hit the pavement running at 6 a.m. You don't stop till you're on the plane to get home. It never gets tiring. I don't know where the strength comes from other than the Lord. It never gets monotonous. It never gets boring. The most rewarding part of Israel is to see the aha moment. I've seen grown men, as masculine as they come, as bodybuilding, as tough, as bravado as they come, weep and cry with contrition at some of the holy sites. I had a pastor from California. All his life, he'd wanted to go to the Western Wall. And as a 50-some-odd-year-old pastor, he couldn't go down the steps. He could only see the wall from about a 400-yard distance. I said, man, we're here. Let's go. Let's put our kapara on. Let's get to the wall. He said, Pastor, I can't. He said, I've waited all my life to get here, and I'm so moved with emotions now, I can't even take a step. That's the effect that Israel and these holy sites have on the average Christian pastor, who for many of them will only go once in a lifetime.
Pastor, I'm going to say something relatively outrageous, that of course, that there are black Ethiopian Jews that are full citizens in Israel, and for us, they are our full brothers, that their skin color has no relevance whatsoever. Can you understand that?
Yes, I can, and I just think that is one of the talking points that does not get enough credit. Israel deserves so much more recognition to be the only country in the history of time to bring back its own citizens, and not just to bring it back as slaves or servants or domestic workers, but to give them full citizenship and rights. Now, again, is it a perfect system? No, but it is a developing and advanced process that I'm proud to say that I am knowledgeable of that. My last trip there, I've gone to a couple of the Ethiopian absorption areas. I see how they go literally from living in a hut outside in the yard to living in an apartment, obviously. There's a wonderful company. I'm going to give them a shout out. It's a jewelry store right across the street from one of these Ethiopian areas. Brand new store. Levi. It's called Levi. And it's a wonderful organization where they're literally taking Ethiopian citizens, teaching them, training them, paying their full scholarship to school, and then employing them in their jewelry store and teaching them a trade. And if that doesn't epitomize, if that doesn't capture what Israel is about, I don't know what does.
That segues inadvertently into a talk about the contention that Israel is an apartheid state. If there's anything that is untrue, is that Israel is an apartheid state.
Well, obviously, you and I know that Israel is not an apartheid state. Quick story to capture this. I was in South Africa last year, and believe it or not, we had the first night to honor Israel in East Africa in Nairobi, Kenya, which was a huge, we couldn't get enough people in the room. I mean, people were standing outside. We had hundreds and hundreds of people outside who couldn't even get in the auditorium. It was that well received. But in South Africa, on a wet, rainy, cold Wednesday night, there were 4,000 South Africans in Cape Town who came to my Standing with Israel event. And I showed them a quick video by Dennis Prager dealing with Israel being a so-called apartheid state. The video wasn't over with before they were all standing with ovation, some even comically laughing, because they could not believe the comparison was being made to what happened in South Africa to what is so-called being happening today in Israel. Israel is not an apartheid state at all. Well, the question is, well, why are the Palestinians and the Muslims being oppressed? Well, it's not Israel that's doing the oppressing. It's the leaders of Palestine. It's the Palestinian leaders that are doing the oppressing. And, of course, we know the three famous no's that needs no talking about, obviously. But, again, if the Western media is the only voice piece and mouthpiece of Israel apartheid, well, we've got work to do, because certainly that's not the case.
We have many different issues going on in the Middle East. One of the biggest issues right now is the oppression of Christians in many different countries. In fact, I just wrote an article concerning African refugees in Israel and the difficulty Israel has in trying to figure out how to handle 50,000 plus refugees from Eritrea primarily and Sudan. But there are Christian refugees not only all over Africa, but all over the Middle East. Does Christians United for Israel deal with those issues, and how does it address those issues?
Yes, we do. And Rabbi David, I'm glad you asked that question. That is really a newer initiative we've taken on probably within the last 6 to 9 months. We recognize that there's a huge problem in the Middle East with Christian persecution, and that's something as leaders we decided at CUFI we take on headstrong, and that's exactly where we're at. We want to identify and we want to be able to share with the world that there is much Christian persecution in the Middle East. However, Israel is the oasis. Israel now becomes the safe haven. And I have not read your article as of yet. I will get to it, but I'm sure we will all agree that Israel has found itself in a very, very unique position. And again, that only goes back to the characteristics and the integrity and the heart that Israel has for the disadvantaged. We have to make a stand here in the United States, and I think CUFA has taken a leading edge to deal with the Christian persecution in that Middle East, the Northern Africa area as well, even in Nigeria. I mean, look what's happening in West Africa right now. This is something that, unfortunately, our country, the United States of America, is not paying enough attention to. And I find that appalling. I find that almost embarrassing that we have an African-American president that refuses to shed a stronger light on persecution in the Middle East.
Now, one of the issues that I've been dealing with is this issue of refugees in Israel. And the Eritrean refugees are primarily Christians. They're coming to Israel because, for the most part, they can't really support themselves financially. They're dealing with human rights abuses. They're dealing with religious persecution, all kinds of things. And the Israeli government, I think, needs some help, to be honest, to try to figure out how to deal with that community. What I find so interesting is that around the world it seems like everybody just expects Israel to deal with it, and the different organizations around the world don't seem to be trying to figure out ways to help. It's frustrating. Israel obviously can't absorb that huge a percentage of a community, but these are people who really need help. They need, and particularly Eritrea is a place that the United States needs to pay attention to, and Europe needs to pay attention to, and the Christian community around the world needs to pay attention to. The best way to help Israel deal with those refugee situation is to fix the problems back home and allow people to go back to their home countries and be able to live at peace. And I can tell you from a perspective of our organizations here in Des Moines and also my We Are for Israel organization, I would love to help out in figuring out a way to help Christians United for Israel also work to help make that situation better and promote relief efforts for Christian communities in the Middle East, not just in places like Eritrea, but also in Egypt and Iraq and other places. We need to figure out a way to help other communities, because Jews have always known that when there's persecution going on in for religious reasons, Jews are at the top of the list. If they're persecuting people other than that, Jews are for sure being persecuted. And so we're always willing to help.
Rabbi, I would strongly suggest, and again, to answer your question, I know that CUFI has made a strong push and advancement to support those that are being persecuted in the Middle East. With your writing, your leadership, and you already know the inroads at CUFI, you already have some already ready-made great relationships. There may be a conversation waiting to happen, because I know that we've embraced it. I just don't have in front of me the nuts and bolts and how we're actually, pushing certain causes. But I would encourage you to make the connections you already have and say, hey, I know you're for working with us, but exactly how and has anyone considered a certain spoken the will, if you will, of advancing this cause?
Absolutely. Well, Pastor Stevens, thank you for joining us on Understanding the World today. It's been a great conversation, and I hope people have learned a lot. I'd like to also thank Dr. Ronald Bergman for his support of this show, and to thank Mark for joining me in the studio today. Any parting words, Pastor Stevens?
Well, first, let me just say thank you all. Thank you for having me on the show. I've looked forward to this for a good while now, and I appreciate all the work that you all are doing there in the Des Moines, Iowa area. I'm here, of course, whatever I can do representing CUFI, my colleagues. As you asked earlier, there's a place where we have to put feet on the road, and we've got to march out our prayers. And I think by doing that, we can make a difference here in the States as well as in Israel.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you for all you do, and blessings in your efforts.
Thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon.
You too.
Let me let you in on a little secret. You ready? Always try to do business with people, not places, especially if you seek honest Christian business people. And when it comes to my car, I really need to trust who's working on it. Now, my family is so blessed. A few years ago, we found a family-owned automobile repair shop that operates as a Christian business also. Open, honest, reliable, trustworthy. It's AMCO on Hickman Road in front of Kmart, and it's a family-owned Christian operating business. This family treats your car as if it was their car. Everything from oil changes to transmission repair and everything in between. So the next time you feel the need to be at peace with your choice of who you can trust with your car, give AMCO on Hickman a chance to serve you. And tell them Max sent you.
All across America, there are countless numbers of people struggling with addiction and other life-controlling issues. Probably someone you know and love. There is a way out. there is hope. Transformations Treatment Center in Delray Beach, Florida, has a unique approach to substance abuse treatment. Call now and ask about our Guaranteed Success program or log on to transformationstreatment.com. Transformations. Change your life, change your relationships, transform your world.
Get away from us, you mean old credit card. We don't have any more money. We're in trouble now. Save us! Help! Somebody save us! Somebody help! Help! Save us!
Hi, I'm Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of Des Moines. If your credit card's a little too animated, give us a call.
Hooray! We're